here we are having childcare conversations. I'm Chloe from the Childcare Counts Coalition in Windham County, Southern Windham County, and I'm here with Mel Zinn, the owner of Horizon and Mulberry Bush, and Claire Kendrick, who is part of the coalition and helping us out. And we are going to talk about how do you start a childcare business. So we're really excited, Mel, that you could join us to do this. And we're just going to talk and see what happens. So why don't we start with how long have you been doing childcare? Like, how long have you been in the business?
Yeah, so I grew up living in a home childcare. My mother, Judy Rosner, was a home childcare provider in Vernon, Vermont she started when I was born. So it was like 30 something years before she retired. So I grew up with the kids in my space and having to share my toys and all of that stuff. And as I became a teenager, I saw a lot of the advocacy work my mom was doing, and part of the beginning of Starting Points Network, which I know is called something else more recently, but to me, since it goes that far back, it's still Starting Points Network. So watching her and Sue Clark, who's now, they're both since retired from the field, both home childcare providers, just get together and go to meetings. And once I became old enough, I was volunteering for both of them and then subbing. And I was inspired to sort of start summer camp stuff. My cousin-in-law also was a co-founder of the Family Garden. And so once that opened, I worked with them to help remodel and do parts of the building, and saw them, was inspired by women building that. And really started off not very confidently running their summer camp program. This is what I'm going to do. And so I just jumped in. And so that's sort of how it started. I then got my undergraduate in financial accounting and thought, this is not for me. I need children and people in my life. And so I then switched to early ed in college. And right out of college, I worked as a para educator in the public school system. And then I was a pre-K teacher at Hinsdale Elementary School in New Hampshire. And after 2 or 3 years, lost my job due to a reduction in force. And at that time, my husband and I had just adopted our first child, and I didn't know what to do. And I thought, you know what? I want my own preschool in my own house. And I just started digging and questioning. And I had all these wonderful women who I could ask. I could say, hey, how did you start this? What do you do? So it's all about building a network to start it. And then in a nutshell, it grew from a home child care, which you have to have first before you can have a licensed child care. So I had that for 2 years with the goal to become licensed after 2 years. And then I've since grown to a center. And then I ended up helping to save the Mulberry Bush Early Learning Program, which was then the Mulberry Bush Independent School at the retreat in Brattleboro. And then where it all started in my home in Vernon, which I no longer live in, I started a third and smaller kind of nature-based infant toddler program there a year ago now. So I have all three. So it's gone over I'm 40. And I started when I was 16 or 17. So wow. It's all been yeah.
I think it's unusual, I think to hear that you started with financial accounting, because I think that is one of the things that really is daunting to folks, people getting into the field, I love kids, I want to be with kids. And that business piece is sort of the part that's missing. Talk a little bit about how that's helped you, and what those of us who are the people who are thinking about this, who don't have financial accounting in their background, what do they need to be thinking about? What would be helpful on that business front?
Yeah, I think that even though I had that background, I still had to look at, I remember before we even had all this technology and QuickBooks systems that I've since learned, you have to be open to learning new things, right? So studying accounting in college was, I realized, not for me, but I was able to apply it to what income comes in and what bills to pay. And again, I leaned on through the Starting Points Network then, Billy Slave, she became my mentor. My mother was obviously another mentor. But just looking at, they said, this is how you record stuff. So sitting down with somebody who's done it, that's what I now love to do for new directors who aren't sure how to run a program, or home childcare people who want to start one, sitting down and saying, this is a template, and not recreating the wheel. There's information out there. You don't have to feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, because you don't at first. Mm-hmm. So it's about saying, hey, Chloe, like looking you up online, emailing you, I'm interested in starting a home childcare. Like, what are some resources? And that there are people like Chloe, Claire, and myself who can just plug you in, right? To especially that intimidating piece, which is like the financial piece. Yeah. So I have been blessed that I have access to that. And I was trained through one of my expansions. I had a loan from Vermont Community Loan Fund. And part of that was having someone mentor me on QuickBooks. Uh-huh. So that was really helpful. Mm-hmm. And I learned the whole software. And then as I grew, I've actually passed that on to somebody else who's now does bookkeeping for a bunch of local childcares. And yeah, so it's surrounding yourself with people and resources and not being afraid to ask the questions and saying, I don't understand this, or I don't know how to do that part. And it's okay to be intimidated. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't want you to be intimidated by the children starting one or the families, but it's certainly okay to be intimidated by the financial piece, and just know that there's lots of us out there to help anyone who wants to start.
Yeah, that's a great point. As you think about helping people start a business, connecting them with other people who are interested in helping, mentors, and that network you mentioned, that really sort of was a foundation for you. And then how do we make that accessible, either through the Starting Points Network, which is now the Windham Early Childhood Educators Co-op. So that's a really robust group, and we can connect people with that for sure. But even being more intentional about that mentoring, maybe that's an area that we could really think about.
I agree. I think having an intentional mentor is really important. Like if someone's interested, because you might not realize you're missing out on pieces or things. And having Billy Slate come into my house, and I remember I had a baby later that first year I started home childcare. I started it not knowing I was going to be having a baby. And I remember how Billy came into my bedroom, that's where my little tiny desk was, and she sat on my bed and was mentoring me from there. In the space, I hardly had any space. And things on stars. I didn't know anything about stars then. And it was listening, walking, helping, trusting someone, right, to walk me through this process and say, this is what you do next. This is what you do next. And it was that, and many different people helping through all the different parts. Yeah. It was really, really important.
Let's talk a little bit about licensing, because I think, that seems daunting also. I think people might look at the regulations and be like, is my house going to even work? Am I going to have to put a ton of money in or a ton of changes? What was your experience around that? So when you started your very first program and Billy was in there in your bedroom helping you sort through stuff, did you have to do a lot of work?
Yeah, so licensing was intimidating at first, and that was before we got a much thicker version of licensing. So I can imagine that can be really intimidating to people right now as well. The licensors were always great to work with. So I sat down, I believe Elaine Crawford has always been my licensor, except we had a few years in there where it was a woman named Sarah. But just sitting down and saying, what do I do? So they'll also answer your questions. These are read the regulations, and they don't all make sense at first, but you can ask questions and they'll go through your house and say, this is what you need. There's also many people in the area throughout Vermont, in any county, where someone who has home childcare can come, just say, hey, come over. What is it like for you? How did you start? What do I have to look at in my house? Because every house is different. Starting a home childcare is much simpler than trying to have a licensed home program. Which just brings into account more fire safety, they need to septic design and flow for the number of children. A licensed home allows 12 children in your home with up to another helper. So that's separate, but you have to start with a home childcare anyways before you can consider that. So it gives you 2 years to really learn licensing regulations for home-based childcare. And reading and marking. I don't know this, asking questions. And there are no dumb questions. The only dumb questions are those we don't ask. And it's really true, because you might miss something that doesn't make sense, but there's lots of us who can help make sense. of it for whomever needs it. And Elaine, like I email her questions still now about certain things, and she responds. You can call the licensor of the day. Anyone can call the licensor of the day. If you have a question and you're just learning the regulations, you can just call and say, can you explain this regulation to me? So I think that can feel a bit intimidating. And as far as like being in your house, it's just safety. It's smarts. It's if you have a wood stove, you're going to need a gate a certain distance away. If you have a fence near a road, the slats have to be a certain distance. Just taking into consideration that you are providing a safe environment for other children. And then there's the record check piece. You have to have a clear record check because you can't care for other people's kids without that. But it really walks you through what to do in each specific order. And I would say 6 months is the best timeline to take to open a program, at least 6 months. I think anyone could do it in 3 if they're really a go-getter and they're really going to plug in and they're going to ask the questions and they're going to reach out. But I think 6 months is like, hey, Chloe, hey, Mel Zinn, hey, whomever is a mentor or, up and coming in childcare in your community in Vermont, like I would say going to them and saying like, where can I start? And then we can sort of point people in whichever direction, because it's really important that we get more childcare and especially home programs, because people are really looking for that intimate home program setting.
When thinking about it's, I think it's a lot easier. It's easier to set up a home-based care and a registered home than a center. Like standing up a center is a lot of work, but getting started small. And I think that's our best bet for encouraging people to do that. That's our best bet for expanding the slots and the capacity in this community. And, I have to, just to say, I bet there are people out there who are taking care of their own kids and could actually, want their kids to play with other kids and want some income. And I think, it just seems in terms of, and it's really, I think the other thing, like, it's really entrepreneurial, right? It's really, really small women-owned businesses and that frame. And so how can we help, or typically women, how can we help get resources? So you mentioned a loan from the Vermont Community Loan Fund, and that there was really technical assistance around that somebody, part of that was, so that sounds like that was a good resource. What did you use that one for?
So I used that resource when I was ready to become a licensed home and I needed to expand my septic design. Yep, I used that along with Let's Grow Kids, their Make Way for Kids grant in the very beginning. One of their first rounds of doing that helped that space. And now that space is now a center. Mm-hmm. No one's living there. It's a center. It's a small center because I love the feel of a home childcare. Like you're just caring for kids in your house, and so that's why I kind of brought it back to being in that space. It's a quiet, intimate, doesn't really have a center feel. It more has like a home childcare feel, which is just a few more kids and more staff. But I think, Chloe, what you said really resonated with me when you said people are probably home with their own kids. Childcare is expensive. And so often, and especially added the layer of the pandemic on top of it, to be home in the comfort of your own home, where you can clean your own home if you're, and you can, all that stuff, like to be able to watch your own children. And there's some regulations around that, if anyone's considering it, that your own children either do or don't count in certain ratios, depending on their ages. So you can have a certain number plus your own. And then there's after school kids, which increase your number in the afternoon if you want people to come off the bus. But the idea of being home with I wasn't expecting to have a baby, and caring for that baby and 2 other babies, but I had 6 children, my son, I had 2 other 1-year-old and another, just almost 2. And then I had 4 kids and I had someone helping me then because I had just had a baby. But I just remember the joy of like, I was nursing, I was giving this baby a bottle next to me, and the kids I was laughing with them running outside, like, well, we're all just like enjoying life. Mm-hmm. And my child has grown up to be so empathetic of, yes, he had his own stuff he didn't have to share, but he also realized like the bigger kids in a home childcare setting, like the 4-year-old would help him when he was 2. We're going to go for a walk. And they would help each other. And he learned through that. And he is now an empathetic, lovely 9-year-old. And I think a lot of it is due to starting in having to share mom and having to share, you know, the love of just like one big family. And that was Claire put together some questions for us, Claire, and I thought too. And one of those, like, what is one of the things you love, like in deciding, and to open one, and then one of the like a really good positive thing is like it takes a village to raise our own kids. When you have a childcare in your own home, you end up having this beautiful village of all these other families, and you can have potluck, and people can stay. And I remember I had 2 moms who would come at the same time and nurse, and they would stay till the end of the day, and they would nurse and I would nurse, and the 3 of us would sit and we would just talk and learn from each other. And it was just always so awesome. So if you're feeling isolated after this pandemic too, and you're home with your kids and you want to make some money, like honestly, this is the time. Like, now is the time to do it, because it is perfectly bonding. You'll have, if you do it in your own home childcare, you're your boss. So you can say, you know what, we had an exposure to COVID, we're going to close this week, right? Like you get to make those decisions based around what is happening in the world. So I sometimes miss that piece, right? Because it was just such an awesome community.
Yeah, that's so great. And so then on the flip side, what are some challenges, or what would you give warnings about in terms of, I think it was great you pointed out, like, really this is all about asking questions and being curious and exploring. And so, just ask a lot of questions. And I'm guessing there were some things that are, here are the top 5 things to watch out for, that really start here, because it's going to get more complicated. What rises to the top for you around that challenge?
So a few of the top things are boundaries. It's your home. And it's hard to ask people to leave when you're ready at 4:30 or 5 or whenever you're closing, to be like, I'm leaving, I have an appointment, or you can nurse outside, but I'm locking my door. Boundaries is really big, because you do become a family. And curtailed on that one is you have to create healthy boundaries and say, this is the amount of money that I charge, and you have to collect payment. And that can feel tricky. So there's some great ways out there. I just shifted to using Brightwheel, which is a childcare app. So I bill ahead of time. So bill the first of the month. Families have to pay. And so then I'm not chasing money typically. There's also remembering to have healthy boundaries, in that you can expand that, and you can say, this family is really struggling. You're the one who gets to say, listen, you can just pay half now, pay half in 2 weeks. So there's beauty to that too. So boundaries is really one of the biggest challenges. And that takes, again, kind of networking with other providers to see what they do. What are you doing? How are you collecting? Because that feels yucky, that piece. And this parent is late again, and I have to take my kid to soccer. And as a home child care, you likely have car seats in a van, and then you have to tell that parent, like, I'm leaving and you're not here. So they have to come get their kid with you. I mean, that happens. So the other piece, again, I think because they're sort of all wrapped up in boundaries, it's your space. So when I grew up watching my mom, she very different from how like Sue Clark ran hers. Sue had this beautiful coat area, but then you go down the stairs and her whole childcare was down in her basement. For most of the time I was with her, it wasn't always like that. And Ellie Mayanen, another person who I grew up helping in summers, again, a space that is separate. So if it's in the basement, you have to have different access points for fire safety and things. But having a space that is separate is really important. My mother did it differently. The childcare came out. There's a playroom. She moved the coffee table and put books out, and she set it up every single day. And at 5 p.m. every single day, it all went away. And it looked just like my mother's house. Like, you would never have known there was a childcare in there. So there's that. There's different flows with what works for you. We ended up we had a small house, like 1,300 square feet when I started mine. And we lived in the childcare. We lived in the preschool. Like, the kids napped in my kids' room, and we lived in it. And that was challenging. That's one of the reasons why I did move to a center, to move it out of the house. So yeah, just being mindful of your space and what works for you can be a challenge. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I wrote down that might be a challenge.
Is there anything particularly like around licensing or fire safety or money besides collecting money, like some of those concrete,
Yeah, in the beginning, yeah, I think it can feel tricky setting up a business in the beginning. How do I acquire the things that I need? The beauty of a home childcare is also that you can ask families and you can say, like, I'm looking for a high chair to be donated. And, I'm starting this, just reach out to your community. If you don't have families signing up first, before my space was before I even started, I had 6 families enrolled. Like, and I lost my job in May and I opened in September for home childcare. So I just had been in the community enough, like not even doing childcare, but just known that I was able to get people want good home childcare too. Like they want to just trust with their kids. So I think that I was fortunate to not have too many obstacles with licensing because I had the people in my life to answer all the questions. I imagine someone being completely alone and opening that book could freeze and be like, no, like, I'm not doing this. This is my house. I have to license my house. It's different. A licensed home childcare is technically a licensed building. It's public. A home childcare is not. So although if licensing shows up, you have to let them in, it's still your home. So it's not a public building. So there's like some different pieces. And I might be getting that wrong. It might be like if you go over a certain number as a licensed home or a center, then it's a public building. There's things like that take some time to learn. I think a challenge is learning the regulations. Like there are a lot of regulations, mostly safety and ratio and how many kids you can have and how to help them nap safely. It's a lot of safety stuff like that. So that can, you can feel like there are barriers. But I encourage anyone thinking of opening their own business to just look at it one piece at a time. And when you hit something you don't understand, write a note, like stick a sticky note on there and then sit down with licensing and say, can I just have a visit? Like, can I go over these? And there are people who will explain it. And it's really pretty straightforward. Again, I would encourage anyone to take at least 6 months time from the start of wanting to open until opening to make sure you're really ready. And in the process, you don't change your mind, which is okay. But I think it takes at least 6 months. Any other barriers? I think, fire safety, unless you're having something in like a basement, and then you need sprinklers. If it's a center, I'm not sure home stuff is needed. Lots of people don't use that area of their house unless there's 2 exits. And fire will come and they'll say, hey, this is what you got to do if you have to do anything. You need to have a fire extinguisher. You need to have, there's a lot of common sense things that you just walk through. I think, I'm trying to think if there's any other barriers. I think finding the right way to track finances for you. Everyone's mind works differently and it's your business. So you're tracking the finances. There's a lot of resources out there, especially on the web, of how to do it, how to open your own.
Yeah. And I think part of what we hope to do is, when you search the web, it's this like onslaught of information. So how can we maybe help curate a little bit or point in the right direction? And again, identify people locally. So we've even started thinking about small business association or small business loans and technical assistance from entities that are supposed to help people start small businesses because they I think sometimes childcare gets put in its own bucket and it's a small business. So let's figure out how to connect people to loans or those folks who typically do this anyway. So locally, so it's like both and
Vermont, the state of Vermont has a lot of small business support and they have a lot of women-led business support.
And actually just as a little side note, the Vermont Community Foundation has the Vermont Women's Fund. And I think they're going to be very interested in helping women start small businesses. So for us, in Vermont again, but it would be great if in our region we could attract some of that money. So just that's on the radar for me is how can we help people get the resources they need? And it's not always a lot of money, right? So we used to have the Quality Fund. through United Way that could be for, you know, helping small expenses to help programs maintain their stars or their quality, you know, ratings or, you know, improve. And I think we could stand up something like that again, like use the Elizabeth Christie Fund of the Child Care Accounts Coalition to maybe next time raise money to help people start a business, right? There are different ways to target those resources. So
yeah, I think some of the most expensive resources you need are you have to have a computer, you know, to really to connect and to run a business in this day and age.
Yeah.
And so I think ensuring that people who are looking to start their own small childcare also have access, if they don't already have one, and ways to get technology quickly into their hands so that they can access a spreadsheet to track income and expenses and things like that, or QuickBooks if they want to upload it on there, or there are you can pay people to run your business part for you if you don't want to deal with the numbers.
Sure.
And it's not super expensive because it doesn't take them as many hours to do the things. It might be like passing that thing on that will ease your mind in opening home childcare. Into like tag sales. Like when we started, we tag sold puzzles, we tag sold stuffed animals, we like dress up, like just look for free stuff, go out to tag sales. You can start it up for pretty cheap that way with some decent stuff.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, anything we haven't covered that you think somebody considering opening a business in their home would want to know or think about, or some last little bit of advice?
I think you need to ask yourself questions like, with gas prices, do I want a short commute? Like you have none, people are driving to you. And do you enjoy children? Because you need to enjoy children. It can be really challenging in moments when you're alone and you have a crying baby who you're holding and a toddler tantruming and 2 kids waiting for lunch. You need to remember to breathe. You need to remember to talk to the kids and just be like, I am having a hard time right now. Oh my goodness, look at all this that's happening. Because sometimes you do have that alone factor, which is why networking is really important in finding other people in home childcare. Just call, set up your FaceTime, be like, hey, look at all the kids. Like we're struggling over here for a minute, you know? So I think that's important. You have to enjoy children. You have to like helping others because what you're doing is helping families. You're helping yourself to start a business and to have good income coming into your family, to have the flexibility to say, this is my calendar. Like we're closed for 2 weeks in July and that's okay. Because that's your family vacation and you're closed for Christmas and making those decisions. So you get your own flexibility. And you have to be able, you have to be creative in some aspect because it's all improv. You don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment with the kids or the families, or, you know, parents get divorced and you're helping support that in your home, or you're helping, a family in crisis, or someone has a parent who there needs more help, and there's so many scenarios that you really do have to know how to improv and be creative, and just breathe through all of it. So I think if those are all things people are looking for, now is the time to just open a childcare. Try it. I mean, the worst case scenario is you try it and you're like, this isn't for me, and you can work to let families know. But best case scenario, you've got like this great, awesome thing in your house, and you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? You know?